idea I like to keep in my mind is playing like I'm already playing through a mixer, like it's a recording that's already been mixed and balanced, and they have the fader levels set where they want to for each of my drums and cymbals. As I believe I said in another video about the height where you sit and the height where your drums and cymbals are relative to you, I think I mentioned that you don't need to hit cymbals as hard as you hit drums. If you're hitting drums harder to play louder or just because it feels fun and satisfying, I think if you listen to different albums, keep in mind that drums and cymbals are going to be mixed at different levels. They're going to be, in the recent era, post-1970, when a lot of different microphones are available, when they have enough tracks to use a mic for each drum and cymbal. If they're doing that, you're going to hear that the snare drum is probably the loudest item, followed by the bass drum, followed by hi-hats, or followed by crashes, and then hi-hats, and then the ride cymbal, and then the toms, or maybe then the toms, then the ride cymbal. But in other words, snare comes first, followed by the bass drum, crash, and hi-hats, and then followed in some order by the toms and the ride. I think if you listen to a lot of different songs you like, you'll find that to be the case. And typically the loudest three things in the mix for pop music with loud guitars, electric guitars, are the vocal, the snare drum, and the guitars. And it depends on the band and the album and the song and who is recording it, who's mixing and mastering it. But I think you'll find in some order, vocals, snare drum, electric guitars are going to be the three loudest things in any mix. But, having said all that, if you're going to hit one thing hard, hit the drums hard and not the cymbals. Especially with thinner cymbals, you don't need to hit them hard to make them speak. And I would also encourage you to, keep the cymbals not terribly tightened down so that they can move. You actually want them to flex and move around. In other words, the only time you're going to choke them is if you're doing it with your hand to create a certain effect. But in general, let them flex and wobble and move around. It'll keep them from breaking as fast, and they'll also sustain longer. But you don't have to hit, especially thin cymbals, very hard to make them speak close to their full volume. If they sound distorted, you're probably hitting them too hard. And if you're breaking them, you're definitely hitting them too hard. And by the way, damaging things is a lot easier with bigger sticks. You're playing with smaller sticks, and that's actually good. I think smaller sticks encourage developing more of your finger and wrist technique because you don't need as much effort to move the sticks around. So typically drums louder than cymbals. One recording I think of with regard to dynamic levels for each drum and cymbal, it's different by decade, right? 70s and 80s, they're emphasizing different things. In the 80s with the hair bands, you've got the slaughterhouse snare, the super, super loud snare with the gated reverb and all that. In the 70s with a lot of dance music, certainly in rock music, they had the toms really muted, bass drums really muted, everything muffled and taped down. Some people even tape cymbals. You don't need to do that very often. But if you remember the song Rock With You by Michael Jackson, it's a fairly muffled snare drum sound, but the snare is louder than the bass drum, is louder than the hi-hats. So all of that a long way to say, think of it like a mixer where you've got a mic on each item and they're all slightly different fader levels, and it's up to you to make it sound like it's already mixed on a recording. When you sit down to play, ideally, toward the tail end of my, quote, career, I wanted it to sound like it was already mixed and playing through a stereo. But Rock With You, great example of that. Drummer is a studio cat called JR, John Robinson. Look him up. He's got quite a resume. There's a lot of those super deep cats out there that are on 500 records that you've heard and you have no idea who they are because they just do sessions. But they're not famous. Only other musicians know who they are. Check out John Robinson. But